So, December 17th, 2014, President Obama decided that the United States was going to normalize relations with Cuba. And since then, everybody's been wondering, what does that mean? And everybody's talking about it, right? Because it's been 50 years. We've been trying to figure out this relationship with this country that's only 90 miles away. So why is everybody excited about it? Well, there's a couple of different reasons. First of all, it's been 50 years. It's a mystery to most Americans, right? What's going on there? It's beautiful. It's a very interesting, diverse place. It's called the Jewel of the Caribbean for a reason. It's the largest island in the Caribbean by far. It's actually larger than all of the islands in the Caribbean combined. So it's new to us, and yet it's old. It's back in time. And so I've spent 1 minute there compared to these people here. Our experts are going to tell you what's going on there. And so this is a very great opportunity for anybody who has questions. Please start thinking about your questions, because we're opening this up in a Q&A kind of a session. And so let me start with our introductions to our people here, these wonderful experts that have volunteered their time. First of all, we'll start with Bob Saxon, which I think everybody here does know, is the president of International Yacht Collection and brings a diversified collection of skills and background, including over 30 years of experience in running his own multifaceted yachting service company. Bob Saxon and Associates was as president of Camper Nicholson, and after BSA was acquired by that firm, stretching back to the vice president of the company that first introduced the concept of yacht management in the world, Whittemore and Williams. Boy, that's an old name. He's vice president and on the executive committee of the Florida Yacht Brokers Association and founding president of the International Superyacht Society. Over the years, he's worked in one capacity or another with over 2,500 yacht owners in providing management services, charter management, retail charter sales, and yacht brokerage. Bob Saxon. Oh, let me switch you over here. I've got slides. I forgot about those.
We can get that off with.
Tony Zamora, Antonio Zamora, has practiced law in Miami for 40 years with some of Florida's largest and most prestigious law firms. His practice has centered on foreign investment from the United States to Latin and Caribbean and vice versa. Mr. Zamora frequently lectures on Cuban topics in national and international universities' College of Law, where his main course is in Caribbean law and development. He's also co-owner of Cuba News, a monthly publication founded in 1992 by the Miami Herald that has become the world's leading source of business information in this secretive nation, only 90 miles south. And then we have Marilyn DiMartini. And Marilyn is a sports and fitness writer, which also began work in American Powerboat Association, offshore racing, where she handled public relations for a national racing team, which I found out was actually cigarette. She continued the freelance writing career with magazines such as Yachts International, Invictus, Motorboating and Powerboating, covering yacht destinations, events, and personal and corporate profiles. Expanding and creating the PR Power Agency, and then represented the Powerboat P1 International Racing Organization based in London. Marilyn recently traveled to Cuba, and while visiting the Gaviota Marina Veradero, has quoted the developers expected that Cuba will become the new jewel of the Caribbean. And Leonard Macklin. Leonard offers Havana Ferry Partners his unique Cuban experience as the former vice president of Miller Farms export of Basel, Colorado. Miller Farms was instrumental in opening trade between the USA and Cuba and helping the Clinton administration in the forming of TSRA regulations. He was the first American licensed by the United States Treasury Department Office of Foreign Assets Control, or OFAC, which you'll hear a lot about today, to travel to Cuba for the purpose of pursuing agricultural sales to Cuba. His numerous trips to Cuba have resulted in many contacts within the Cuban government, contacts extremely important to the initial meeting with Havana Port Authorities, Aries Transport, and the Ministries of Transportation and Tourism. With that, I give you our experts. Now, if you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand anytime. We are opening this up as a Q&A. So where I'd like to go from here is just to ask our ladies and gentlemen a little bit of information. Oh, there's Leonard. Here is our wonderful island of Cuba. And as you can see, there's 11 million people on this island. It's a flourishing a place, but it's stopped because of certainly issues regarding, well, politics that we're not even going to get into today. So after this day of infamy, have things really changed? Tony, could you talk about how can Americans legally travel to Cuba?
Yes, do you hear me? Yes. Oh, okay, good. Travel to Cuba is basically up to the executive branch, meaning the president. Bush 43 practically canceled all trips to Cuba or travel to Cuba. It was very difficult to do it, and it was very restrictive. Obama did the opposite. Now everything is fairly easy to do. However, you cannot do tourism, whatever that means, and that's a little complicated. You have to have a purpose to go to Cuba. That is because Congress did pass, in one of the laws that had to do with Cuba, a restriction on tourism, that tourism cannot be allowed in Cuba and so on. So everything else is okay. You can go to Cuba to visit relatives, assuming you have any relatives. You can go to Cuba to the Hemingway tournament. I'm taking actually a group. I took one last year. I'm taking another one this year, to the fishing tournament. You can go to do professional research, which is what I have been doing for the last 30 years or so in Cuba, or 25 years or so. You can do educational trips. You can do stuff having to do with environment, all kinds of things. There are 12 categories right now that is a general license. A general license means that you don't have to apply for a license. You have to qualify for the license. And that's a big difference because until now, most of these categories were, you needed a license. You need to apply to Treasury to get it to OFAC, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, to get the license to go down. So now it's a lot easier. Let me tell you about going by boat. And most of you, of course, consider that. You can go by boat if you go to something like the Hemingway tournament, which is a well-known fishing tournament, or some other activity that may be similar to that. But if you have an American boat, a U.S.-made boat, or with a lot of U.S. components, you have to get permission from Commerce, from the Department of Commerce. However, if you have a boat that is less than 10% American components, and you know, Azimuth, there's a number of boats that fit that category, then you can go to Cuba assuming that that boat is registered outside of the United States, Cayman Islands, whatever. By the way, Cuban Americans can go because Cuban Americans can go in a boat if it fits those categories. Americans would have to fit the categories also. So travel by boat is highly restricted in that capacity. You have to go to a specific event right now, and that requires the approval of the Department of Commerce and the Department of the Treasury. If your boat is registered outside and you have less than 10%, then you can take your boat.
So just going back to that, do you see anything changing now?
Yes, that's a very good question. The Congress, well, there's been introduced a law in Congress not too long ago maybe a month or two ago at the most, to eliminate the restriction on tourism by Americans. And I personally think that law is going to pass. If not this year, next year. Why do I think that? Because I think it's, I'm a Cuban American, so I don't have any problems, but I think it's awful that Americans are restricted to go to a place. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And, you know, we are the champions of liberty and so on. It doesn't make any sense. So that's the argument that both Republicans and Democrats are doing to get that law passed. It's offensive to Americans. It's restricting specifically American-born people. Doesn't make any sense. So I think that law is going to pass, if not this year, next year, and then you will be able to travel a lot easier going to Cuba.
Thank you. Bob, can you tell us, have you seen an increase in the amount of interest in chartering in Cuba?
Yes, but of course the restrictions are there, so if there is charter activity taking place in Cuba right now, it's pretty much off the books. Okay, and yes, with the recent legislation, we are getting interest, but it's not of considerable to any considerable extent. But what one thing I would like to say about Cuba and the potential when the restrictions are dropped is that the charter activity that we anticipate, based on a number of things. Number one, well, let me just talk about the charter market in general right now. And Billy Smith and I Billy was kind enough to get his calculator out, and I was running some numbers here. Chartering approaches nearly $1 billion market right now. 10 years ago, it was a $300 million market. The number of boats that are residing in the Caribbean, for example, there are about 350 yachts over 100 feet that seasonally spend time in St. Martin and thereabouts. If you go to St. Martin now at Port de Plaisance and Ile de Sol, you see wall-to-wall white boats doing nothing. Okay. And where it was at one time that the charter fleet in the Caribbean used to average anywhere between 8 and 9 weeks, and incidentally, the Caribbean represents about 20% of the gross charter activity worldwide. The Mediterranean is the stronghold at 60%, and the rest of the market is spread between New England and and the Bahamas and other destinations. But what's happened to the fleet in general is that where they used to average 8 to 9 weeks of charter in the Caribbean, the number of weeks of charter is down to somewhere around 3 or 4. Yes, there are yachts that do more charter work than that, but they're boats that have been in the business for a long time and they have a lot of repeat business and such. But in fact, because the number of weeks has dropped from 3 to 4 weeks, it's because the fleet has expanded exponentially. The charter fleet has, and there has not been a corresponding marketing effort to keep pace with the expanding fleet, in my opinion. The second factor is that charter customers are seeking new destinations. And why would Cuba itself be an interesting charter destination? Well, if you go to St. Martin and Ile de Sol and Port de Plaisance, they're terrific charter destinations. But what I refer to as the misery index is great as well. And we know that those folks that have been in the yacht management business, and Mike and Reardon and such, know that there are travel warnings. You're welcome to move freely within the yachting, within the Falmouths and within the Port de Plaisance and such. But once you get outside the confines of the luxury yachting facilities, it's not a friendly atmosphere or environment for the most part. And so the factor that charter clients are looking for new destinations, and there have been many, many efforts to develop new charter destinations, such as Tahiti. But Tahiti will never be a viable charter destination because of the great distances that have to be traveled. And the fact is that there has to be demand before the boats will go there. And so it's the cart before the horse. And there is no demand because of the distances. So owners don't take their yachts there. But with Cuba, you have the proximity, the close proximity to the United States. And I believe that when the restrictions drop, as Tony alleged just a second ago too, I believe what's going to happen, you're going to see a marked shift in the charter market. And a lot of boats will be departing the Caribbean because of the paucity of charter activity and looking toward Cuba to be a destination. Now, one reason we don't have a lot of active interest in is because of the travel restrictions primarily, but also charter brokers who are asked about other destinations tend not to try to push a destination with which they're not familiar. So the way to build a charter destination is to educate the charter brokers through various methodologies, and then the charter brokers in turn, when a client says to them, well, what about Cuba? They can start to say, well, I've been there, I've experienced it, and I can give you a wonderful 7 or 14-day cruising plan and cruising itinerary. So I believe that when the restrictions drop, and they will, I believe that it's not going to be the last frontier, but it'll be the next frontier for any of a variety of reasons that I've just mentioned, as well as topography. It has the topography of the Caribbean. It has friendly people. Crime is, I'm not saying it's non-existent, but it's not allowed. As we all know, basically. There is some nightlife. We were talking earlier about how friendly it is to just go up into the hills and be around the friendly Cuban people and how gracious and welcoming they are to tourists and to others that are coming there. And while it has no infrastructure, the yachting infrastructure will happen as a result of demand. What the yachting infrastructure will be for those boats, those yachts that do relocate to Cuban waters, is in South Florida. And I believe that South Florida will see a boon in activity because the yachts will be depending on South Florida for repairs and maintenance and fresh water and provisioning and all the things that we can provide, and we do provide so well. So slowly but surely, as the yachts gravitate toward Cuba, by demand, the yachting infrastructure will grow there, and it's going to be great for the Cuban economy.
Let me add something to what you said that I think is important, and I think you'll find it important. About a year and a half ago or so, the Cuban government created a maritime commission and passed a law for the maritime commission. And one of the things that it's in that law is that you can be in Cuba for 5 years without paying any tax, you pay the dockage and so on, but you can stay in Cuba for 5 years and renew that 5 years for another 5 years. That goes very well with the idea of cruising and so on. And it is now the law of the land.
And that actually, I want to go back to that in a minute here. But meanwhile, Leonard, if you can talk about your business plan and how this has affected you.
Well, our company, Havana Ferry Partners, started about almost 6 years ago. We made our first OFAC application 6 years ago. It took 2 years for us to get a reply from OFAC, and it was a denial of the license application. And it was due to a policy change needed for them to issue a license for travel by boat. We recently reapplied for the third time after the president made the announcement on December the 17th. And our license is under consideration, and it's taking forever for them to make the interagency feed into the regulations. They're writing the regulations at this moment, and they should be out any time. And we have been told that our application is at the top of the stack. So to address something that Tony said, there are two types of licenses that come from OFAC. One is a specific license, and the other one is a general license. The general license allows for travel agents to sell tours or whatever for specific activities in Cuba. A specific license holds you to the regulations. You have to, each individual specific license has things in it that you have to adhere to. The other thing was, it was mentioned that yachts going to Cuba have to apply to the Commerce Department for a license for that yacht. And the way that's done is by going to a website called SNAP-R, SNAP-R. It stands for Simplified Network Application Processing. And once you register and get an account on SNAP-R, then you are able to fill out the BIS, Bureau of Industry Standards, application for that specific boat to go to Cuba. So we have done that few times and have experience at that. If anybody needs any help with understanding SNAP-R, which is a pretty complicated process, feel free to contact me, and I'll give you any assistance I need. But to get back to our specific application and how we had to change our business plan. The business plan that we first submitted to OFAC has evolved. Every time we reapplied, we addressed the business plan changes that were needed. And now we are more focused on security of the yacht, of the passenger ferry. So things that are important to the government are homeland security. They have the greatest say-so in the issuance of licenses for passenger ferries. So we had to pay close attention to Homeland Security, Coast Guard, Customs and Immigration, more so than the actual day-to-day operation of the ferry business itself. They want to know specifics about Homeland Security, Coast Guard regulations, and BIS approval of the boat. So if anybody has any questions about BIS or SNAP, or how to get a license for a specific boat, I'd be glad to help you with it. Okay?
Thank you, thank you. All right, well, and then Marilyn, can you tell us, you've just taken your first trip to Cuba, and tell us about the experience.
I wanted to qualify that I don't consider myself an expert, having been there once, but as a journalist, it was very exciting for me to be able to share the experience. Has anybody else been to Cuba here in the audience? So you know, and have no doubt shared your stories about the eye-opening experience that it is to travel to a place that seems, you know, stuck in a time warp. You know, you saw all the pictures of the 1950 cars, and they're driving, you know, in the busy Havana streets alongside a horse and buggy, and bicycles and a lot of two-stroke motorcycles as people, you know, try to transport their families on handlebars and sidecars and hitchhiking. Being in Cuba as a cultural traveler, I didn't go on a journalist visa. I went with a group called Cultural Contrasts, which did an excellent job of arranging everything. We were on, you know, organized tour buses, Havana Tour, which is a major tour operator there. And I made arrangements to go see the new Gaviota Marina Veradera. Now, Veradera has been the big beach tourist location about 120 kilometers east of Havana. Now, Havana is, you know, this bustling city that produces about 45% of the country's GDP, and the rest of it is vacant. I mean, we drove for 130 kilometers without seeing anything but a few Chinese and Russia oil rigs, and then getting to this, you know, beach development. And Gaviota, which is a, you know, so I understand is basically a military operation. It is a state vertical tourism operation and developer, has done this multi-million-dollar development. I don't know if the slides are in part of this presentation, but I will say a word from my sponsor. You'll see it all in Invictus magazine next month. But the size and the breadth of the Veradera Marina is breathtaking. They've built over 1,000 boat slips. They've got 12 fishing brand new charter vessels. They've got 14 huge catamarans, all waiting for tourism excursions out of the resort. They've got apartments, hotel, it's all inclusive. The luxury of it, you'd think you're in Club Med anywhere else. We're just, you know, 120 kilometers away. The rest of Cuba is falling down. I mean, the neglect and the state of the buildings is heartbreaking. And, you know, it's hard to go on a trip like this without being struck by the socioeconomic and the politics of the, you know, of the conditions that were caused by the revolution. But, you know, 59 years ago, you know, 1959, it's been in the same time warp while the rest of the world has progressed. And because they know little else, you know, they have a government newspaper, government radio, and some TV. The internet is extremely restricted to tourists. Some of the students at the university have restricted access. But if you keep a people ignorant, you know, there is an element of bliss in that. So the Cuban people are very warm and very happy. And as one Cuban told us on our tour, we don't have a lot of money, but we have a lot of love. You know, there's something to be said for that.
Well, speaking to that, as far as where they're going, Tony, can you talk about what they're doing as far as their infrastructure? And you mentioned the Nautical Tourism Commission.
Let me say something more covering the whole thing, but I'll get to the nautical tourism. Yes, the Cuban government, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, is very aware that they were pretty much going down the drain. And they started a process of economic opening, which was very limited until the second Castro brother took over. When Raúl Castro took over in 2006, they started a second opening of the economy, which I think is doing fairly well. The idea is to have, or the idea of the government is to have about 50% of the Cuban economy in private hands. One thing that you have to remember when you talk about Cuba is there is about 1.5 million Cuban Americans here, maybe 2 million, depends on how you count. And these folks go back and forth to Cuba. They take money to Cuba, they have relatives in Cuba, they buy homes in Cuba, they do all kinds of stuff in Cuba. Last year, the Hemingway tournament, and this is the first time, this is the 65th this year. Last year it was 64th tournament. For the first time, a Cuban crew or a Cuban team won the tournament with a bayliner. That, no, I'm not kidding. They got a 450-pound marlin with a bayliner, a 28-footer or something, 26-footer. That bayliner was bought by a relative in Miami and took it down. These folks also own a very good restaurant, and they go fishing practically every day on the bayliner from Miami. And they do very well. They have a very good paladar. Well, they don't call it paladar anymore. That was now there are a lot of private restaurants in Cuba doing extremely well. And this is one of them. It's very close to Marina Hemingway. I point that out because there is a transformation, which is the question. There's definitely a big change going on. To me, one of the most important things in that change is that you can now sell your house in Cuba, get the money, and get on a plane and go away. Before that, before 3 years ago or so, 3 years ago, you could only do a like-kind exchange. It's what we call it, we lawyers call it in English, in the United States rather. You can change a similar house without any money, but now you can actually sell your home. There's a lot of stuff fixing homes right now. One of the things that the new Obama initiative says, the new rules, is that you can export construction products from the United States, but mostly from Florida, to Cuba. So there is a big change. Part of it is age. You know, the first Castro is 88, going to be 89. The second Castro is like 83 or something like that. And he said that he's going to retire in 2 years and so on. So there is undoubtedly a big change. Now, how does that affect the nautical tourism? Folks, without the United States, there is no nautical tourism. There's going to be 2 boats from Spain, 3 boats from Mexico, and that's it. We are the boat. So if the Americans start going to Cuba, which I think we'll do at one point, that is the nautical tourism. I can see 30,000, 40,000 boats going to Cuba every year. There is a study done by the University of Florida about 15 years ago about the relationship between Florida and Cuba. And it's a very good study. I should have brought a copy. I have one copy, but if anybody has an interest, I can email you. But this is done like 20 years ago. they are now trying to bring it up to date, to update it. Of course, they need funds and contributions to the university. I'm helping on that and so on. But this study is very comprehensive. It has like 200 pages. It talks about the coral reefs, the whole thing. And it's by the University of Florida. And what is that organization that funded these kind of things? Boating, something or other. Not boating, what is it? Well, I don't remember. There's an organization that paid for this, or paid part of it for the university. And this thing is very, very well done.
Well, I think this slide probably says a lot about.
Not so fast. This is a new path.
The commercial director at the Marina Gaviota, you know, said, we are waiting for the U.S.
Sure.
The 1,000 slips that they built were empty. I mean, you ask about, you know, how does this differ from, you know, from other marinas you've seen or, you know, around the world. You know, most marinas are very bustling, active places. This place was desolate. There was a handful of Canadian and European boats there, but until we get there, you know, there's nothing going on. And they realized that when they built it. You know, so the contrast is, you know, they criticize us. There's propaganda everywhere, you know, anti-U.S., the U.S. is strangling Cuba and all these kinds of things. And they like to tell us that their capital was modeled after the U.S. Capitol, but it's 2 feet higher. So, yeah, but yours is falling down. You know, yours has, is under renovation because, you know, you've let it deteriorate. Ours isn't. But you know, they know that they need us, but they've got to make a lot of changes before U.S. enterprise can go in there and feel any degree of comfort that the same thing isn't going to happen, that they're not going to become nationalized and lose their investment.
Well, Leonard, can you talk about that as far as you've probably been traveling to Cuba for how long?
Could you go back 2 or 3 slides?
Sure.
The next one, that one.
Ah.
Does anyone know what that building is? That's the original Sloppy Joe's. It's been redone. It's under construction there. The hotel around the corner, the Park Central, took it over, and they completely redid it. And it's back to being the original Sloppy Joe's. Do you know how it got its name, Sloppy Joe's? Because he served seafood on ice, and the ice melted, and it flooded the floor, and the place was always Sloppy Joe. Actually, the ice melt went down into the basement of that, and it was all wooden pilings, and they had to really spend a lot of money to get that building back in shape. But it looks beautiful today. It looks really good. Something that we were talking.
I want to add. These are your pictures, actually, from your charter.
Yes.
And so if you tell us about these pictures, we're going to take a look at.
This is a yacht called the Double Haven, and it's based in Hong Kong. The Double Haven is the name of a bay in Hong Kong, and the owner and his wife hired me to be their guide, their translator, and their security person for their trip to Cuba. We spent 30 days aboard the yacht, and we went from Hemingway Marina. I flew down to Havana ahead of them to make some preparations for the yacht, but the yacht came down directly from Fort Lauderdale to Havana, and we spent a month. We spent a week in Havana at the Marina Hemingway, but there was no place to park the yacht. We stayed for the whole time at the Customs and Immigration dock. It was the only place large. There's only one place in Cuba that a large yacht can anchor or more. It's in San Fuegos. It's a big bay, and we anchored off 100 yards off the Havana yacht, off the San Fuego Yacht Club, and that was the only place where a yacht would be safe from hurricanes. Currently, they're building a floating marina in the harbor of Havana. They've just taken the largest dredge I've ever seen and pulled up all the pilings of the old pier that was there, and now they're getting ready to put in a floating marina with hotel, restaurant, the whole 9 yards of a floating marina there. So that's about 1.5 to 2 years away. Everything is going to be floating, so they don't have to build any kind of underwater infrastructure. The other thing I wanted to say was that can I change this?
Yeah.
This is the rear view of the Hotel Nacional in Havana. And right behind you, if you're standing there looking at it, is the seawall and the ocean right behind you. This is in front. This is in front of the U.S. interest section in Havana when the Bush administration put up a rolling banner in the top floor of the embassy, the interest section. You know, it was advertising democracy and freedom. So the Castro brothers put up these flags to block the view of that. And these people here are all protesters holding up photographs of someone that's connected to U.S. indiscretions. Let's see what else we have here. This is inside of the Tropicana. Yes. The
Tropicana.
Tropicana Hotel. It's an outdoor
No,
floor
not hotel, the nightclub.
The nightclub. It's an outdoor floor show. And there are two big trees in the background. And in the trees are singers and dancers on a walkway that link the two trees together. It's really something to see. It's a first-class floor show, something that, you know, you'd see in Las Vegas. It's another shot of it. This is an interesting shot. This is the captain of the Double Haven, and a gentleman on the left side of the photograph. He's a manager for Gaviota. The three gentlemen at the seat. The green guy is the Customs and Immigration. The guy in the center is the medical officer, and the other one is the immigration officer. If you notice, they're all barefooted. We asked them to take their shoes off to come aboard, and they had holes in their socks. And they were so embarrassed they took their socks off. But they were really nice, and you could see the stack of passports in front of them there. That's from the crew of the yacht, and I was the only American aboard. Did I do something wrong here? This is a street scene down in Old Havana. Here's a shot of some young military officers in Old Havana. This is a guy selling religious artifacts at the church in
It looks like the University of Havana.
No, it's the church where I forgot the name of the church right now, but he sells these religious artifacts. This is the yacht in Cienfuegos Harbor, in the Bay of Cienfuegos.
So you're saying that's the best
That is the
anchor.
only place that I know of where a yacht over 150 feet can go.
Gaviota is building one at Veradera. It's the Superyacht area is under construction, but it's well away.
Okay. So it sounds like we have a long way to go.
Yes, it's not ready for mega yachts. You know, yachts up in the 100 feet can go into the Marina Hemingway, no problem. There's a lot of space in there. It's still, the infrastructure of the marina is a little bit lacking. The electrical hookups, there's no sewer hookups. There's a ship chandler there where you can buy food, and beer, and wine, and rum. The marina itself is fairly nice. There's some nice restaurants there. There's some condos out there. It has potential. Whether it's going to be developed into a mega yacht is something questionable because there's no space. There's no room inside those small canals. If you pulled the yacht into one of those canals, you'd have to have a tug to back it out. It's sort of a jigsaw to get in there.
Well, Bob, you mentioned provisioning, and that actually brings me to another question. And Tony, I'm thinking maybe you might be able to answer this. What happens if something goes wrong? What happens if there's a salvage situation or a sinking or who's in charge and what happens?
Basically, the Cuban Coast Guard.
The Cuban Coast Guard.
Yeah. And by the way, the Cuban Coast Guard deals a lot with the U.S. Coast Guard. There's a very good relationship between the Cuban Coast Guard and the U.S. Coast Guard for many years. Actually, the Cuban military and the U.S. military get along very famously. I was introduced as a foreign investment lawyer, and that's what I've been doing for the last 40-some years. And I can tell you there's a lot of interest from people in the US, but also from other Canada and Europe and so on, in what may happen in Cuba and how can they want to participate in the development of projects. And of course, Marilyns is one of them. I do know that there is a group now looking at Marina Hemingway to do some sort of cosmetic changes, but there's another group who wants to redo the whole thing. And to create a mega yacht, you can do it fairly easy in Marina Hemingway by eliminating some of the canals and that kind of thing. It can be done. Now, whether somebody would put the money for that, whether the government will approve it is a different story, but there are people looking at these things right now.
Can you comment about?
Just to add on what Tony's talking about, the Marina Hemingway, there's a cut that goes into a lagoon, and to the left is the Marina Hemingway. Well, if you come in under heavy seas, you surf into that canal.
Ooh.
And it's quite a challenge for, we had a captain aboard who wasn't experienced at driving this boat everywhere. And he tried to make a turn. And he's going too fast and he hit the dock. So if you know somebody in a large boat going down there, you have to use caution in entering that canal under sea, with the sea is more than 4 feet, because it'll just push the boat right into the canal. It's just a short turn to the left. So that's a really, we had to spend about a week more than we wanted to in Havana for the crew to repair the side of the boat where the captain hit the concrete pier. So,
Was there anybody who was there who could repair it if there
no,
was more damage?
The crew itself had all the ability and the materials to do the repair.
But there's no shipyards.
There's shipyards in Cuba, yes, they are. Damen, who's the largest one of the largest shipbuilders in the world, have 2 shipyards, one in Santiago de Cuba and one in Marilyns.
Yeah.
Could I
Yes, please.
Yeah. So I think, if I may, I think the direction of the overarching message might be a little. Thank you. Might be a little skewed right now because it's. I'm going to be blunt, sounding a little doomsday-ish. So you know, I know Double Haven might have gone and they had their own itinerary, but we've planned. First of all, there are lots of boats that don't go through OFAC and the normal. I think it's got to be clear that there are Americans in boats that go there. They just don't do it legally, bottom line. And they are usually going through, and you don't enter or leave through America. You know, you go around America as much as you can. Americans still aren't allowed to spend dollars in Cuba, is that correct?
No, not
Exchange.
really. You can exchange it.
Okay, you can exchange.
People
now.
do take dollars.
So
that's
people
all.
go. The other thing, if we could go back to the slide of the country, you know, I think we're missing something when you say there's no infrastructure. You don't need infrastructure. There's lots of places to anchor out. In our talk yesterday, we were talking about how owners don't want to be seen, how owners want to go to some place that's beautiful. If you look at Cuba as a whole, the entire, on the north side, you've got an incredible number of islands and places to go that are protected. The south side's supposed to be some of the best diving in the world. And so I think there's, you know, yes, it doesn't have infrastructure. Yeah, if you crash your boat, you're not going to probably get it fixed there, and you better bring enough food and all that stuff. But we've had people go, and we've had people plan on going and doing it regardless of the rules. And it is not for the faint of heart, but you don't. But someone who's adventurous and wants to go to an incredibly interesting place, the island is huge, that it can be done. And I think that's the part of the story that might be missing here.
Well, legally is the key word there. So it depends on if you want to go and be there under the laws of your land. You know, that's one thing. But I wanted to, you might be able to address more the currency issue, you know, which we were just talking about. You can bring US dollars there, but you can't use a credit card. and you have to convert your dollars into their currency, which is basically the CUC. CUC,
Yeah.
they call it the CUC, which when I was there was about 87 cents to $1. But I've heard stories of captains who have gone there to, you know, to go to a marina, and they didn't have currency, so they couldn't stay. And then they said, well, you know, you have to pay to be here. And he said, well, do you have water? No. Do you have electricity? No. Well, then why do I need to come to the marina? I can just moor out here. So you know, there is an issue of if you're going to provision a boat or whatever, how are you going to do that if you don't have currency?
Well, first of all, one of the things that has happened since December 17th is that now American credit cards are allowed in Cuba.
Oh.
And you can use your MasterCard, you can use your American Express, and so on. I think that's already in place. If not in place now, it's going to be in place next week. There are a number of entities like American Express and MasterCard who've said that they're going to go in. Now, that is going to be usable in certain places. The hotels, obviously, who could do this. I would assume that marinas and airports and so on will also, you can use your credit card. The issue with the cook, or the Cuban, is disappearing. Supposedly it's going to be disappearing. There are two currencies. One, the CUC, which is hard currency, is actually worth more than $1. And then there's the Cuban peso, which is worth, you have to have 25 Cuban pesos for $1. And so that is changing also. That's one of the things that is in the agenda to be changed. But perhaps the most important thing is that very soon you can use your credit card in Cuba. And there's going to be also the possibility of transferring of money down to Cuba, that kind of thing, if you have a problem or something. That has been going on for a long time, but it's restricted basically to family. You can send money to your family, but now you can wire money if you have a problem with a boat or something, you can wire money down to Cuba. And that's in the works right now.
If there was a problem, a serious problem, and you needed money in Cuba, you can go to you can have money sent via the State Department to for the U.S. interest section in Havana, and you could go there and they'll give you the cash. I had $2,000 wired to me through the State Department and picked it up at the intersection once.
And I don't think we're talking about something that is brand new. So you're right, Michael. We are bringing out some negative things, but I think overall it's a real positive. I mean, it's a real opportunity. There's a question in the back.
Can we take some questions?
Yes.
Now? Do you guys mind? We have a question right here.
Yes, and talking about taking yachts and boats to Cuba, does anybody know what the electrical infrastructure is, whether it's 50 or 60 cycle?
Don't know.
I don't know.
Don't know.
But you see American boats, they're getting electricity, so I assume it's okay. By the way, a gentleman there said something that is true. The travel to Cuba for the Hemingway tournament ended in 2002 with the Bush 43 administration. But since then, every Hemingway tournament has at least one or two boats from the United States. And they're not actually fine, nothing happens. Everybody knows that that's going on and nobody does anything. And there's reasons for that, but I don't want to get into it.
Just to wrap it up, Bob, why don't you say something about what? I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Well, I'm really glad that Mike made that distinction because it started to sound as if there was no place for yachts to go there. But in fact, I think the coastline is complete with so many opportunities, lagoons and inlets and such to anchor out. And most yacht owners are seeking privacy anyway, and charter clients are seeking privacy. Yet they have the opportunity to go into Havana, enjoy the nightlife as it was shown in the slides. And the other thing I want to just mention is that the tangential effect that this will have on the industry, as you expand the charter opportunities, because the decision-making process in buying yachts and building yachts often is accompanied by business considerations and how much charter work I can do. I think as the charter market expands, you'll see that have an effect on buying and building yachts as well. And there's a number I want to everybody to remember, because I know everybody in this room. I asked yesterday in my own little vote how many people are affected by yacht sales, and everybody in the room raised their hand. And I think it's the same, even the gentleman that was up here talking about his canvas factory shop, everybody in this room in one way or another is also affected by the charter market. Because 78%, and this is a number that I love to throw out there, 78% of people who buy or build yachts have chartered at least once. And what I see is, at least for the present, if restrictions drop, I see fully loaded boats, as Mike alluded, coming out of Florida with food, fuel, provisioning, flowers, whatever, and on their way to Cuba to enjoy the Cuban hospitality and coastline and such. I believe that the ultimate effect on the positive effect on the Cuban economy will be slow coming, but as the infrastructure grows, and yacht repair facilities and provisioning and fueling and such, that's where they'll begin to see the greatest effect on them. That means jobs. So
Yes.
I'm very optimistic that it's going to be a great thing for the charter market.
Anything else we'd like to add?
The diving is out of this world in Cuba. If you look at the map, on the far western tip, you see a little bay there. That's called Maria La Gorda, Playa Maria La Gorda, Fat Mary's Beach. It is at the end of the road that goes across the savannah there, and there's a small resort there. But right off the tip of that little bay, there's 2 Spanish galleons in about 60 feet of water that the cannons are still sitting there. And that just, it looked like something from a Disney film. It looked like a movie set to me, because I've never seen that before. I've been diving all my life, since I was 12 years old, and I've never seen anything like I've seen in Cuba. On Isla Juventud, the small island to the south, right off the south end of that island is a wall. It drops down almost 900 feet. And diving that wall, as you go down, you see all different sorts of sea life. The owner of the Double Haven, he's an amateur photographer. And he took his video cameras down there, and he filmed strictly microscopic and small sea life. He got red shrimp mating and nematodes, different colored nematodes, and they'd spend half an hour photographing these small things growing, living on the wall off the Isla Juventud. There are 3,000 keys in Cuba. On the south side, around in the middle there, where that big circle is drawn, it's called the Garden of the Queen. And those islands, those little keys, have some of the best fishing and diving in this part of the world. The only place I can compare it to is the Maldives. I've been to the Republic of Maldives to dive, and it's very similar. You don't see the deep, deep sea life there, but you see a variety of marine life that you don't see anywhere else in the Caribbean. It's not fished out. It's not anywhere explored yet. And I think anchoring large yachts on the south coast is the way to go if you really want to go with a big boat. That's it.
Well, anything?
We have some questions from the audience here,
okay.
so hang on
Here we
one second.
go.
I think normalization is going to take a long time. To finally get it right, it's just going to take years and years and years. The travel industry aside, I think access is probably a precursor to a lot of business activity wanting to create a presence down there. The question I have is, I was involved with Puerto Rico back in the early days of its build-out, and the tax incentives that were provided by the U.S. government to assist in that infrastructure development to allow businesses to really develop there and want to go there, like Baxter Travel and others. Do you see a day when the government really shakes hands with the U.S. and really gets involved in partnering the development of the necessary infrastructure, training programs, and so forth, that would allow them to be successful in integrating businesses into Cuba?
You're looking at me, so.
Yeah, well, kind of the panel.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a transition going in Cuba that is partially biological because of the age of the leaders, but also because it's a necessity. And also because of the 2 million or 1.5 million Cuban Americans in the United States who have relatives in Cuba. Travel to Cuba right now, the number one is Canada with about 900,000. Number two is Americans with about 400,000 every year. And that is going to grow and grow and grow, and I don't see any way of stopping that. I think there's going to be embassies, although the interest sections in Cuba have been there since Jimmy Carter was president. So there's been a long road that's been already crossed. The interest section is not an embassy. Now what they're going to do, they're going to have now embassies in both places, and I think there will be, the embassies will be there before the end of the year. And that creates a whole new idea of how things work. I'm very positive. Actually, I would recommend, since not many have been here, I wrote a book about 1.5 years or 2 years ago called What I Learned About Cuba by Going to Cuba. And my going to Cuba was complicated because my first trip back to Cuba was to the Bay of Pigs. I was a Bay of Pigs invader. I was in prison in Cuba, and then in the 90s, I decided to go back and see for myself for a number of reasons. And you can read the book if you want. It's in Amazon.
I think you're right about there's going to be another great change. President Obama made the first step. I think the next step will come after the passing of the Castro brothers, either by the Grim Reaper or whatever. As soon as that happens, there's going to be another change. There's going to be all new blood. There's going to be things that...
We have a question here in the back.
It's a very simple one. Where, as an American, where do you apply for the license to go to Cuba under the certain headings that you've outlined?
I'm sorry, I didn't...
Where would somebody apply for a license to try and travel to Cuba? How would you go about that?
Well, if you're going to go on a yacht, you'd have to have a specific reason to go on a
No, if you
yacht.
just
Just
were going.
personally?
The travel agent will provide it. Right now, everybody can go to Cuba except to do tourism. There's all kinds of trips. You go to a travel agent, and the travel agents are multiplying, but there's special travel agents, and it's very easy to get a license to go to Cuba right now.
I mean, you Google
Department.
Cuban travel and
No,
I think
you go to Cuba Travel, and there's dozens of travel agencies. The one that I recommend, because it flies American Airlines, is ABC Charters, but there are many. There's Marazul, and there's a whole bunch of airlines that are going to disappear, because in 6 months, the travel agency that rent rent or charter the planes to go to Cuba, that business is going to disappear, because American Airlines, Delta, and all the others are. JetBlue is now flying to Cuba, and this started about 2 months ago. But American travels to all the airports in Cuba that take international. By the way, there's like 7 international airports in Cuba.
I have a question regarding the Castros. When they pass, is there visibility on where the power lays after they're gone?
Yes, there is a successor already, a fellow named Diaz-Canel, who's about 54 or something. I think when Raúl Castro, Fidel Castro is 88 something, and he's pretty much out of the picture, has been out of the picture for quite a while. Raúl is still apparently in good shape, although he's 83 or something like that. But he said he's going to retire in 2 years, and I bet that he will, if not sooner, maybe sooner. And then there's a new group of people coming in. The ambassador, for instance, the Cuban ambassador in the United States is in his 50s. There's a lot of people who had nothing to do with the revolution and all of that are going to take over. And again, this guy Diaz-Canel, who's the vice president now, supposedly is going to be the one who takes over from Raúl Castro. I believe he's 54. So there is a biological change. There's no question about that.
These people...
Very good online resource called the Cuba Study Group. If you go to that
Yes.
online, they formed after the Elias Gonzalez saga, and they have a lot of great information on that.
All these people that Tony was talking about were selected by the Castros to fill these positions, by the way. So there's not going to be a great change. They're going to try to remain as socialist as they can because that's what they're used to. Eventually it's going to change. They can't go on like they are. It's impossible. So they know they're forced to make these changes economically and by pressure from within. You know, it's still people in dissent in Cuba.
How do you, Bob, I guess this is for you, how do you propose to build the charter destination if you really can't charter, Michael? And then how are you going to these brokers? I mean, it's not just a fam trip. It's like really building itineraries and everything else. With, there's great restaurants in the Island of the Queens and everything. Is anyone, any of the charter companies specializing in this?
No, not yet. It's an educational process, okay? As I said earlier, first of all, it has everything that a charter client would want, all right? Secondly, charter clients are asking for and seeking new destinations, so it falls right into that nicely. But educating the brokers is where it all begins, and as a matter of fact, there is a flotilla going to Cuba here in the next month, or maybe Diane knows about this, of editors from the various publications, the trade publications are going down. And that's where the process will begin. But nothing's going to happen until the travel restrictions are lifted.
Yeah, and if I can just add on to that, I didn't mean to be, I apologize if I was too aggressive with that, but the fact is that private yachts do go, and and it is an incredible place to go. No charters will go until it's legal. Because, I mean, the risk is just too high.
I suspect there are charters going on, but they're off the books. Yeah.
There have been the small cruising community has been going to Cuba forever. When my husband and I were on our sailboat, we couldn't go because we were Americans, and the Coast Guard basically said you have to prove that you're not going to spend any money, otherwise we'll take your boat. So we didn't go. But our friends were going there all the time, and like you said, the diving and everything was incredible. We had an opportunity to go later on in a different way, but there are resources now available if you just look at these cruising communities who have been going there forever, who will give you all the information you need to set up these charters.
Let me make a point. If you go to two things. You can buy a cruising guide for Cuba. I think there are at least two of them. Yeah. But also, if you go to the Miami Boat Show and the Fort Lauderdale Boat Show, in both of them, you're going to have a booth about travel to Cuba by boat. And that was last year, and it's been going on for 4 or 5 years. And of course, they will tell you, if you are an American, you cannot do this, but if you're a foreigner, you can go to Cuba.
You can go to Cuba, you just can't come back.
You like it so much, you cannot come back.
Last question.
So I'm a little confused. Say with a U.S.-built yacht, Cayman Island flagged, mostly U.S. passported passengers and crew, is there a legal path for them to go?
You have to, if you have a U.S.-built yacht, you have to get permission from Commerce. There are three institutions of government that do the Cuba thing. One is OFAC, which is the Office of Foreign Asset Control on the Treasury. Then you have the State Department that will have a say-so, this is not a good time to go, that kind of thing, and then you have Commerce. Going back to what I said before, if you have a vessel that has less than 10% U.S. components and is registered, say, in the Cayman Islands or some other place, and you have some sort of Cuban Americans can go, because Cuban Americans can go totally freely. That's what I think there's going to happen, something with the law that it's going to be addressed by Congress that would allow Americans to go. So that's basically what happens. You have to get permission to go. You have to go to a boat show, a boat tournament, fishing tournament. You have to go to something. But if that law passes in Congress, then you can go like anybody else.
Specifically, you have to apply to BIS. That's part of the Commerce Department. And you can do this online. You have to register with SNAP and get an account. And I think that the passengers would be a greater issue than the boat itself. If Commerce Department gives you the okay to bring the boat, how are the passengers covered? Yeah, I think if the owner or the majority of the passengers were, I'm not talking about the crew, the passengers were going down there for a function, some approved religious meeting or sporting event, I think that that would be allowed. The problem is not in Cuba. The problem is returning to the U.S.
Well,
that's where the
sort of.
Yeah.
Let me address that because last year I applied. We have an organization called the Florida-Cuba Environmental Coalition, which is basically environmentally oriented. We applied. We had, I don't know, about 30 people applying to bring their boats down to Cuba and so on. We got approved by the OFAC and by the State Department, but not by Commerce. We didn't have time to get it. So we took a dozen anglers and folks who actually took some fishing in the Hemingway tournament. This year, as he's saying, we have now applied online. We've gone through OFAC, we've gone through the State Department, and we are now waiting for the approval of Commerce, which we expect in the next couple of weeks. And we'll have 20 boats going down to the Hemingway tournament. And we have already talked to the Cubans, so we have a slip and that kind of thing. So I think this year, since 2002, we're going to have actually American boats going to Cuba with all the permissions required to fish the tournament.
Okay. Thank you all, and